The neon sign of Molly's Diner flickered weakly against the darkness, casting eerie shadows across the wet pavement. Amber Hayes pulled her thin jacket tighter around her shoulders as she stepped out into the cold October night air. At 19 years old, Amber had learned that life rarely delivered surprises, especially not the pleasant kind. Her existence was measured in meager dollar tips, past due rent notices, and the relentless, soul-crushing cycle of sleep, work, repeat. The diner paid just enough to keep her barely afloat in her tiny studio apartment, where the radiator coughed more than it actually heated the place. She fumbled in her pocket for her phone to check the time. 2:17 a.m. The last bus had already made its final run, which meant another 40-minute walk home through streets that seemed to grow increasingly dangerous with each passing block. Amber sighed, watching her breath materialize into small, fleeting clouds in the frigid air. As she turned into the narrow alley beside the diner, a shortcut she'd taken countless times before without incident, a sound stopped her dead in her tracks. A child's voice, filled with abject terror and desperation, coming from somewhere deep within the shadows. "Help! Please! Someone help me!" Amber froze instantly, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She'd heard stories about traps set for naive young women in this part of town. But this voice unmistakably belonged to a little boy, and the sheer terror in his voice sounded all too real, too genuine to ignore. "Hello?" she called out hesitantly, her voice barely audible, even to herself. The crying stopped immediately, replaced by a hushed whimper, a sound of pure, unadulterated fear. "Please," came the small voice again, trembling with emotion. "I want my daddy. The bad men said they'd hurt me if he doesn't pay." Amber nervously pulled out her phone. Its screen flickered to life, casting a weak, bluish glow into the surrounding darkness. She knew she probably should call 911. That would undoubtedly be the smart thing to do in this situation. But as she cautiously moved closer to where the voice seemed to be coming from, the light from her phone fell upon something lying discarded on the ground. It was a child's backpack, torn and muddied, with a business card half buried in the dirt beside it. Amber knelt down beside it, her fingers trembling slightly as she picked up the heavy card stock. There was no business name printed on it, just a phone number embossed in elegant gold lettering, and a name, Franklin Blackwood. As she flipped the card over, her blood instantly ran cold. Written in an elegant, flowing script were the words, "In case of emergency involving my son, Leo." "Is your name Leo?" she called out softly, her voice barely a whisper. The sobbing halted instantly once again. "Yes," came the reply, sounding a little stronger now, a glimmer of hope creeping into his voice. "My name is Leo Blackwood. I'm 7 years old. The men said they were taking me to see my daddy, but they lied and locked me up instead." Amber's hands shook uncontrollably as she quickly dialed the number on the card, her instincts screaming at her to run as far away as possible. But the sheer terror in that little boy's voice just wouldn't let her simply walk away. The phone rang once, twice. Then a voice answered that sent a shiver straight down her spine. "Who is this?" The 3 words weren't posed as a question, but as a stark demand, a command that brooked no argument. Amber swallowed hard, suddenly acutely aware of how small and insignificant her voice sounded in the stillness of the night. I found something. Someone. Your son, Leo. He's locked somewhere near Molly's Diner on West River Street. I can hear him crying for help." The silence that followed stretched on for what felt like an eternity. It was so long that she began to wonder if the call had been dropped. When the voice finally returned, it had changed somehow. It was colder, harder, more dangerous than before. "Stay exactly where you are. Do not call anyone else. Do not move. I'm coming." The line went dead with a click. "Leo?" Amber called out urgently, moving deeper into the alley despite the explicit warning to stay put. "Where exactly are you? Can you see anything that might help me find you?" Her voice echoed against the grimy brick walls of the buildings lining the alley as she strained her ears to hear the boy's response. "I'm in a warehouse," the small voice replied, sounding stronger now, fueled by a renewed sense of hope. "There's a blue door with numbers painted on it. I can see it through a crack in the wall. Amber's eyes frantically scanned the row of dilapidated buildings behind the diner. Most of them appeared to be abandoned, but at the far end stood a squat, nondescript building with faded blue paint peeling off its walls. The minutes stretched on at a snail's pace, each one feeling like an hour. Amber found herself compulsively checking her phone over and over. 2:31 a.m., 2:32 a.m., 2:33 a.m. Each passing second felt like an eternity as she spoke soft reassurances to the terrified child trapped somewhere nearby. Your dad is coming, Leo. Just stay quiet now, okay? He's on his way. At exactly 2:37 a.m., the sudden sound of high-performance engines shattered the silence of the night. Amber's head snapped up instinctively as bright headlights suddenly flooded the mouth of the alley. It wasn't just one car, but several, moving with alarming speed through the deserted streets. The engine noise grew louder and louder, echoing off the surrounding buildings until the intense lights completely blinded her for a moment. Car doors slammed shut in rapid succession. 1, 2, 3, 4. Footsteps approached, heavy and deliberate, and Amber realized with growing terror that she had unwittingly stumbled into something far bigger and more dangerous than she could have ever imagined in her wildest dreams. The silhouettes of men appeared at the edge of the light, moving with a chilling coordination that spoke of specialized training and a clear, singular purpose. At their center, a figure that seemed to command the very air around him stepped forward confidently into the alley. Franklin Blackwood was nothing like Amber had pictured him from the sound of his voice on the phone. She'd imagined someone older, harder, a stereotypical crime boss ripped straight from the pages of pulp fiction and low-budget crime movies. Instead, the man who approached her was in his early 30s at most, dressed in an impeccably tailored suit despite the late hour and the grimy surroundings. His dark hair was neatly swept back from sharp, chiseled features, and his eyes, cold, calculating eyes, scanned her with an intensity that made her want to shrink back into the brick wall behind her and simply disappear. You called about my son, he stated flatly, his voice carrying the same commanding tone she'd heard on the phone, but even more forceful in person. It carried an even greater weight of authority, an undeniable aura of power. She simply nodded mutely, words failing her completely as she gestured vaguely toward the warehouse with the blue door. He says he's in there. I can hear him through the walls. Blackwood turned to his men, issuing silent commands with subtle hand gestures that were barely perceptible. As they moved swiftly toward the warehouse, weapons seemed to magically appear from beneath their expensive jackets. Stay here, Blackwood ordered her curtly, but something in his tone had subtly changed. There was a raw edge of desperation there, a primal fear that only a father could truly understand. The next few minutes passed in a blur of controlled chaos. The men expertly surrounded the warehouse, communicating with each other through discreet earpieces with almost military precision. Blackwood stood rigidly beside Amber, his entire body coiled tight like a loaded spring, ready to explode into action at a moment's notice. Why did you call me? He asked suddenly, his eyes never leaving the warehouse for even a split second. Most people in this neighborhood mind their own business, especially at this ungodly hour. The unexpected question caught her completely off guard. I heard a child crying for help, she replied simply, stating the obvious. What else was I supposed to do? Something flickered across his face. Surprise, perhaps, or even a hint of disbelief. Before he could respond, a series of sharp, cracking sounds echoed from inside the warehouse. They weren't gunshots, but the distinct metallic crack of locks being forcefully broken open. Moments later, one of Blackwood's men emerged cautiously from the warehouse, carrying a small figure clutched tightly in his arms. Leo! Blackwood's voice cracked with emotion as he rushed forward, instinctively reaching out to take his son into his arms. The boy was visibly pale and frightened, but appeared to be otherwise unharmed, clinging to his father with desperate strength. Amber watched the emotional reunion, feeling a strange tightness in her chest. The powerful man she had just witnessed commanding an armed team of highly trained professionals had been completely transformed as he gently held his son, whispering reassurances in his ear and carefully checking him for any sign of injuries. "The place is empty," reported one of the men, his accent thick with unmistakable Eastern European roots. "They left in a hurry. Must have had a tip-off." Blackwood nodded curtly, his undivided attention still focused entirely on his son. "Who took you, Leo? Did you see their faces?" The boy shook his head, burying his face in his father's shoulder. "They wore masks, Daddy. But one of them had a star tattoo on his hand, kind of like Uncle Julian's, but bigger." At this startling revelation, something truly dangerous flashed in Blackwood's eyes. A cold, simmering fury that made Amber instinctively step back away from him. He turned his gaze back to her, studying her with renewed intensity, as if seeing her in a completely new light. "You've done something tonight that I won't soon forget, Miss Hayes." "Amber Hayes," she supplied, suddenly acutely aware of how out of place she was in this bizarre and dangerous situation. "I'm just a waitress at Molly's diner. I was just heading home when I heard Leo calling for help." Blackwood's eyes narrowed slightly as he processed this new information. Just a waitress who risked her own life for a complete stranger's child. That's a rare thing to see in this city. His gaze swept over her worn, threadbare uniform, the patched-up jacket, the obvious exhaustion etched into the dark circles beneath her eyes. Rarer still in this particular neighborhood. Before Amber could respond, one of Blackwood's men approached him, speaking in low, urgent tones that she couldn't quite make out. "Sir, we found this." He held out a small, nondescript device, its tiny light blinking with an ominous red glow. "It's still transmitting." Blackwood's expression darkened considerably as he quickly handed Leo over to another man, instructing him to take the boy back to the safety of the car. "Miss Hayes, it appears you've stumbled into something exceptionally dangerous," Blackwood said, his voice dropping to a level that ensured only she could hear him clearly. "This wasn't just a random kidnapping. It was a message intended for me, and now you're a witness." Amber felt the blood drain completely from her face, leaving her feeling lightheaded and nauseous. I won't tell anyone," she promised quickly, her voice trembling slightly with fear. "I didn't see anything important, I swear." Blackwood's smile was devoid of any warmth or humor. "That's not quite how this works, Miss Hayes. The people who took my son don't typically leave any loose ends." "I'm nobody," Amber insisted, panic rising rapidly in her throat. "Just a waitress barely living paycheck to paycheck. Who would even listen to me?" Blackwood studied her intently for a long moment, then appeared to come to some sort of internal decision. "You're coming with us now." The cold finality in his tone brooked no argument as one of his men gently, but very firmly, guided her toward the waiting cars. Amber realized with a sinking feeling in the pit of her stomach that her simple, uneventful life had just been irrevocably altered, changed beyond all recognition. The night that had begun with a routine walk home from work had suddenly thrust her headfirst into a world she'd only ever seen depicted in movies and television dramas. The Blackwood estate loomed in the distance like something plucked straight out of the pages of a Gothic novel, a stark relic from another century. It was a massive stone mansion, set far back from the winding road, protected by imposing high walls and an ornate iron gate that swung silently open as their convoy of vehicles approached. Amber stared through the tinted windows of the car, completely awestruck and utterly bewildered by how such extravagant opulence could possibly exist only 30 minutes away from her cramped, dilapidated apartment. Inside the mansion, the sheer magnitude of the Blackwood family's wealth was even more shockingly apparent. Gleaming marble floors reflected the dazzling light of massive crystal chandeliers. Priceless works of art adorned the walls of every room, and the rooms themselves were larger than her entire apartment back in the city. A stern-looking housekeeper appeared, elderly but surprisingly sharp-eyed, and quickly whisked Leo away for a hot bath and clean clothes after a tearful goodbye to his father. "This way," Blackwood directed Amber, leading her down a long hallway to a richly appointed study lined with floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with meticulously arranged leather-bound books. He gestured toward a comfortable leather chair across from a massive, antique desk, then proceeded to pour 2 generous glasses of amber liquid from an elegant crystal decanter. "You look like you could definitely use one of these." Amber hesitantly accepted the glass, but didn't immediately drink from it. "Why am I here, Mr. Blackwood?" The unspoken question hung heavily in the air between them as he settled into his chair, studying her with those unervingly penetrating eyes. "Because you saved my son's life, Miss Hayes, and because that selfless act has now put your own life in very real danger." He leaned forward slightly, his voice low and serious, almost a conspiratorial whisper. "The men who took Leo work for someone who wants to hurt me, and not through any direct act of violence. That would be far too straightforward for their liking. No, they want to break me by taking away what I love and value most in this world." His eyes flickered momentarily to a framed photograph on his desk. A candid shot of Leo smiling widely, proudly displaying the gap where his two front teeth used to be. I honestly don't understand what any of this has to do with me, Mr. Blackwood," Amber said, finally taking a small, tentative sip of what turned out to be an exceptionally smooth, top-shelf whiskey. The unexpected warmth spread slowly through her chest, steadily calming her frayed nerves and easing her growing anxiety. "I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time, I guess." Blackwood's smile was surprisingly genuine this time, almost boyish, momentarily transforming his severe features. "Or perhaps you were in the right place at the right time, from my perspective at least. The real question now is, what happens next?" He tapped his fingers thoughtfully against the polished surface of the wooden desk. "You've seen my men, my security operation, my resources. You know my name, and now you know my face. I told you, Mr. Blackwood, I won't say anything to anyone about what happened tonight." Amber firmly set the glass down on the desk, meeting his intense gaze directly. "I simply can't afford to get involved in whatever this is that's going on. I have rent due next week and a double shift scheduled for tomorrow afternoon. I just want to go home and forget that any of this ever happened." Something that might have been respect flickered briefly in Blackwood's eyes. "That simply won't be possible, Miss Hayes. The tracking device that my men found was highly sophisticated, top-of-the-line military grade. They know that Leo was successfully rescued, and they'll undoubtedly be looking for any potential witnesses." The full implications of what he was saying hit Amber like a physical blow, knocking the wind out of her. You think they'll come after me? But I'm nobody important." Blackwood shook his head slowly and deliberately. "In my world, Miss Hayes, there are no innocent bystanders, just liabilities and assets. And right now, you unfortunately find yourself as both." "What does that even mean for me?" Amber asked, her voice barely above a whisper, trembling with a mixture of fear and exhaustion. Blackwood stood up abruptly, moving over to the large window to look out at the meticulously manicured grounds of his estate, now slowly being bathed in the soft light of the approaching pre-dawn. "It means that you simply can't go back to your apartment, Miss Hayes. Not yet, at least. Not until I've dealt with this current threat to my family and neutralized the people responsible." The full reality of her utterly bizarre and dangerous situation was beginning to sink in, finally, in all its stark and terrifying clarity. But my job, Mr. Blackwood, I'll be fired if I don't show up for my shift tomorrow. And my things, my clothes, everything I own is back at my apartment." Amber's voice trailed off weakly as she realized just how trivial and insignificant these concerns must seem to a man like Blackwood. I don't have anyone who can help me with any of this." Something in her simple, heartfelt words seemed to resonate deeply with him. He turned away from the window, his expression noticeably softer than before, almost sympathetic. "No family, no close friends, no one to rely on?" When she shook her head slowly, he nodded almost imperceptibly, as if confirming something to himself. "Then we'll provide you with what you need, Miss Hayes. Clothes, temporary living arrangements, financial compensation for any missed work or lost wages, whatever it takes." Before Amber could formulate a response, there was a soft, hesitant knock at the study door. It opened slowly to reveal Leo, freshly bathed and dressed in bright blue pajamas, his small face still pale from his recent ordeal, but now composed and calm. "Daddy, I can't sleep." His eyes widened slightly when he noticed Amber standing there. You're the lady who found me. You called my dad. Leo broke free from the housekeeper's grasp and ran over to Amber, throwing his small arms around her in an impulsive hug that caught her completely off guard. Thank you for saving me, he mumbled sincerely against her shoulder. Over the top of the boy's head, she met Blackwood's gaze, surprised by the depth of emotion she saw reflected there in his eyes. Leo, Miss Hayes is tired. She needs to get some rest, too, Blackwood said gently, moving forward to place a reassuring hand on his son's small shoulder. Mrs. Collins will show her to the guest room now. You can thank her properly in the morning. The boy nodded reluctantly, stepping back from Amber, but keeping his eyes fixed on her face. Will you be here tomorrow? He asked, his voice small and uncertain. The unexpected question caught Amber completely off guard once again. This sweet child, who had just experienced such a terrifying ordeal, was genuinely worried about her leaving. Yes, I'll be here, Leo, she found herself promising, though she honestly had no earthly idea what tomorrow would actually bring, or even if she'd still be alive. Mrs. Collins, the stern-looking housekeeper, led Amber through the seemingly endless labyrinth of corridors to a spacious guest room that was easily larger than her entire apartment back in the city. The antique four-poster bed, the luxurious silk sheets, and the adjoining marble bathroom all spoke of a level of extravagant luxury she'd previously only ever seen in glossy magazines and on television. There are some clothes in the wardrobe that should fit you reasonably well, the older woman explained in a brisk, but not unkind, tone of voice. After the housekeeper had left the room, Amber sat down heavily on the edge of the massive bed, completely overwhelmed by the sheer enormity of the events that had transpired over the course of the evening. She'd somehow gone from being a struggling diner waitress to rescuing a kidnapped child to being sequestered in a sprawling mansion, all in the span of a few short hours. Nothing about her life would ever be the same again. She knew that with absolute certainty. A soft, hesitant knock drew her attention back to the door. Blackwood stood there, his tie loosened slightly and a weariness in his eyes that hadn't been quite so apparent before. I just wanted to check and make sure that you have everything you need, Miss Hayes, he said, remaining in the doorway, not presuming to enter the room without an invitation. And to thank you again. Few people would have done what you did tonight. I just did what anyone would have done, Mr. Blackwood, Amber replied, though they both knew in their hearts that it simply wasn't true. The silence stretched between them, charged with unspoken understanding and the heavy weight of the extraordinary circumstances that had brought them together. You should probably know, Miss Hayes, he finally said, breaking the silence, that I don't take debts lightly. You saved what matters most to me in this world. I won't ever forget that. Dawn finally broke over the vast Blackwood estate, painting the sky in breathtaking shades of pink and gold. Amber stood at the window of her assigned guest room, watching the immaculately dressed gardeners tending to the flawless flower beds below. The peaceful, tranquil scene seemed worlds away from the palpable danger and utter chaos of the previous night. A soft knock at the door announced the arrival of Mrs. Collins, bearing a large silver tray laden with freshly brewed coffee and warm pastries. Mr. Blackwood asked me to bring you your breakfast, Miss Hayes, the housekeeper explained in her usual efficient manner. He's currently meeting with his security team, but he would very much like you to join him in his study at precisely 10 o'clock this morning. Amber thanked her politely and gratefully sipped the rich, aromatic coffee, idly wondering what new complications and unexpected challenges this day would undoubtedly bring. The expansive wardrobe yielded a selection of clothes that fit her surprisingly perfectly. Designer jeans, exquisitely soft cashmere sweaters, even an assortment of stylish shoes in her exact size. Someone had clearly done their homework on her while she was sleeping, meticulously gathering information about her preferences. At precisely 10 o'clock, she nervously made her way back to Blackwood's study. He wasn't alone. A man with sharp, almost predatory features and cold, calculating eyes sat across from him at the desk, their ongoing conversation stopping abruptly when she entered the room. Miss Hayes, I'd like you to meet Harrison Reed, my head of security. Reed assessed her quickly with cool, detached professionalism, then turned his attention back to Blackwood. The surveillance photos confirm it, sir. The Petro organization is definitely behind this kidnapping attempt. They've been meticulously watching your movements for several weeks now. He slid several glossy photographs across the surface of the desk. And they definitely know about her now, too. Blackwood's jaw tightened visibly as he carefully examined each of the images. To Amber's growing horror, they showed her leaving Molly's diner the previous night, followed by a series of shots of her talking on her cell phone in the alleyway. They had someone watching the whole time, she whispered, her voice trembling slightly with fear. They saw me call you, which unfortunately means that they now see you as a serious liability, Miss Hayes, Reed stated bluntly, with a chillingly clinical detachment. Standard protocol in these types of situations would be to eliminate all potential witnesses. His cold, unemotional tone only served to make the words sound even more terrifying. She obviously can't return to her apartment or to the diner, sir. They'll almost certainly be watching both locations by now. Blackwood nodded slowly and deliberately, his expression grim and resolute. Arrange for all of her belongings to be discreetly collected from her apartment and placed in storage, and ensure that her rent is covered indefinitely. Contact the diner immediately and inform them that Miss Hayes has taken a position elsewhere. The casual, almost dismissive way in which he seemed to be completely rearranging her life left Amber momentarily speechless with a mixture of shock and disbelief. "And what about me, Mr. Blackwood?" she finally managed to ask, her voice barely above a whisper. "Am I supposed to just disappear? And for how long?" The sheer reality of her completely surreal and frightening situation was finally beginning to sink in. Everything she knew, everyone she loved, her entire life as she knew it had seemingly vanished overnight. "Until I can absolutely guarantee your complete and continued safety, Miss Hayes," Blackwood replied, meeting her gaze directly with unwavering intensity. Before she could formulate a coherent response, Leo suddenly burst into the room, his face bright with innocent excitement. "Daddy, can Miss Amber come and see my new model train set? Please? Please, Daddy?" The boy's completely innocent enthusiasm cut through the palpable tension in the room like a knife. Behind him, his tutor stood in the doorway, offering a silent apology for the unexpected interruption. Blackwood's stern expression softened instantly at the mere sight of his beloved son. "That's entirely up to Miss Amber, Leo. She might be very busy right now with other more important things." The sheer, unadulterated hope shining in the child's eyes was simply impossible for her to resist. "I'd really love to see your trains, Leo," Amber found herself saying, grateful for any excuse, no matter how implausible, to escape the grim and utterly terrifying conversation she'd been having with Blackwood and his head of security. As she followed Leo out of the study, she caught Blackwood watching them both, an unreadable expression on his face. Whatever happens next, she realized with a sinking feeling in the pit of her stomach, my fate is now irrevocably tied to this dangerous man and his shadowy world of hidden threats and constant peril, a world that has unexpectedly and irrevocably claimed her against her explicit will. The days at the sprawling Blackwood estate began to blend together in a strange, surreal rhythm. Amber found herself increasingly drawn into Leo's daily routine, helping him with his homework, reading him bedtime stories, gradually becoming a familiar and trusted fixture in the boy's young life. The lingering trauma of his recent kidnapping had left him plagued with vivid nightmares that only seemed to ease when she was physically nearby to comfort him. Blackwood watched this growing bond between Amber and his son with careful, almost clinical attention. "He trusts you implicitly, Miss Hayes," he observed one warm evening as they sat together in the meticulously manicured garden, watching Leo chase flickering fireflies across the sprawling lawn. "That's a genuinely rare thing for him, you know. Since his mother died 3 years ago, he's intentionally kept most people at a safe distance." The unexpected revelation of Leo's motherless state added another complex layer to Amber's growing understanding of both father and son. "I'm so sorry for your loss, Mr. Blackwood," she said softly. "It must be incredibly difficult, raising him alone in this particular world." She gestured vaguely at the sprawling estate, the ever-present security personnel, the invisible, yet ever-present, threat lurking just beyond the walls. That night, A violent thunderstorm suddenly swept over the Blackwood estate, rain lashing against the windows like tiny bullets fired from a high-powered weapon. Leo appeared at Amber's bedroom door, clutching his worn, threadbare stuffed rabbit, large tears streaming uncontrollably down his face. The sudden ferocity of the storm had triggered vivid, traumatic memories of the dark warehouse, the cold concrete floor, the muffled voices of his masked captors. As she gently calmed him with soothing words and a comforting mug of warm milk, Amber finally realized the full, heartbreaking extent of Leo's emotional trauma. Beyond the actual kidnapping itself, he carried the immense weight of his unusual and highly privileged, yet ultimately very isolated and dangerous life. Armored cars escorting him to and from school, armed bodyguards hovering at his birthday parties, the constant awareness that he was simultaneously a precious legacy and a potentially vulnerable target. "This world, Miss Hayes?" Blackwood repeated with a hint of amusement flickering in his eyes. "You mean my business?" He studied her face intently in the soft, fading light. "You still haven't actually asked me what it is that I do, Miss Hayes. Most people in your situation would undoubtedly be extremely curious about the man who is effectively holding them captive." Amber met his probing gaze steadily, without flinching. "You're not exactly holding me captive, Mr. Blackwood. You're protecting me. At least that's what you keep saying." She paused for a moment, carefully choosing her next words. "As for your business, the armed men, the ruthless enemies willing to kidnap a child, I think I can safely make an educated guess about what it is you do for a living." A faint smile played briefly at the corners of his mouth. "And yet you still stay. You continue to read bedtime stories to my son and eat dinner at my table every night. Aren't you even slightly afraid of being tainted by simple association, Miss Hayes?" His voice dropped almost imperceptibly lower. "A good, decent person like you, associating so closely with someone like me?" Before she could formulate a suitable answer, Harrison Reed suddenly appeared at the entrance to the garden, his expression unusually tense and grim. "Sir, we have a situation. There's been a security breach at the west perimeter of the property." Blackwood was instantly on his feet, signaling to the security team positioned discreetly around the perimeter of the garden. "Get Leo safely inside the house right now. Seal off all the exits." Everything happened with practiced efficiency, the result of countless hours of training and preparation. Armed guards swiftly escorted Leo and Amber back into the main house, while other security personnel moved to secure the grounds of the estate. Through the tall windows, Amber could see heavily armed men wearing tactical gear and carrying advanced weaponry deploying quickly across the vast property. This clearly wasn't the first time that such a serious security breach had occurred at the Blackwood estate. Inside the house, Mrs. Collins ushered them quickly to the panic room, a fortified chamber hidden discreetly behind a section of the library's seemingly endless shelves. "Stay here safely with Leo, Miss Hayes," the housekeeper instructed firmly, her voice betraying only a hint of the fear she must have been feeling. "Mr. Blackwood will come for you both as soon as it's safe to leave." The heavy, reinforced door sealed shut with a soft, pneumatic hiss, leaving them alone in a small, windowless room containing several large monitors displaying feeds from security cameras strategically positioned all around the Blackwood estate. Leo's small hand slipped trustingly into Amber's, his grip surprisingly tight, but his youthful expression remaining surprisingly calm and composed. "It's okay, Miss Amber," he told her reassuringly. "Daddy always handles the bad men. He's the strongest person in the whole world, you know." The unwavering, absolute faith in his small voice revealed a child who, despite everything he'd been through, still felt incredibly secure in his powerful father's unwavering protection. Hours passed slowly before the heavy door finally opened with another soft hiss, revealing Blackwood standing in the doorway. His expensive suit remained impeccably neat and unwrinkled, but a darkening bruise on his strong jaw and the intense, almost feral intensity in his eyes told a very different story. "It's clear now, Miss Hayes," he announced, extending a hand to help Amber to her feet. "But we have a significant problem." Back in his study, with Leo safely asleep upstairs under the watchful eye of Mrs. Collins, Blackwood revealed the full, unvarnished truth. It wasn't just a random attack. The Petrovs had inside knowledge of our security protocols, access codes, blind spots, and shift changes. His voice was dangerously cold and controlled with barely suppressed fury. Someone within my own organization is actively feeding critical information directly to the Petrovs. The full implications of his shocking revelation chilled Amber to the very bone. "You have a traitor in your midst, Mr. Blackwood," she whispered, almost inaudibly. Blackwood nodded grimly in confirmation. "And until I identify them and eliminate the threat, no one here is truly safe. Not me, not Leo, and certainly not you, Miss Hayes." He paused for a moment, his dark eyes finding hers and holding them captive. "Especially not you." "Why especially me, Mr. Blackwood?" Amber asked, the immense weight of her new, terrifying reality pressing down on her like a physical force. Blackwood's expression darkened considerably. "Because you are now the wild card, Miss Hayes, the unpredictable variable in this dangerous equation. The Petrovs undoubtedly want to know why I've brought a simple waitress into my inner circle. They will naturally assume that you have some sort of value to me, or they would have already eliminated you without hesitation." The unspoken implication hung heavily in the air between them. "Do I, Mr. Blackwood?" she asked quietly, almost as if she were afraid to hear the actual answer. "Have value to you?" Blackwood turned away from her and moved to the tall window, his powerful silhouette sharply outlined against the inky blackness of the night sky. "You bravely saved my only son when you had absolutely nothing to gain and seemingly everything to lose, Miss Hayes. That selfless act alone earns you both my complete protection and my eternal gratitude." But there was undoubtedly more to it than just that. Unspoken truths and unacknowledged feelings that neither of them was quite ready to confront or even articulate. Over the past few weeks, their unexpected interactions had begun to. What had started as guarded politeness had blossomed into something much deeper. They shared meals, engaged in late-night conversations, and showed a mutual concern for Leo. Connections were forming, almost in spite of the unusual circumstances that had brought them together. "I need to ask something of you," Blackwood said finally, turning to face her directly. "Something I have no right to ask." He hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain. "I need you to stay, not as my guest, but as part of this household, as Leo's official tutor. It gives you a believable reason to be here, one that even my enemies might accept." The request stunned her. "I'm not qualified to be anyone's tutor. I barely finished high school." But even as she protested, a part of her recognized that qualifications weren't the real issue. It was about the bond that had already formed between her and Leo, and perhaps even between her and his father. "Leo trusts you," Blackwood said. "He needs that stability right now." He stepped closer. "And I've come to rely on your perspective. You see things differently than the people in my world. You remind me there's more to life than power and control." Something shifted in the air between them. A palpable tension that had been building for weeks was finally being acknowledged. "If I stay," Amber said carefully, "I need to know the truth. All of it. What you're involved in, who's after you, what happened to Leo's mother. No more half-truths and vague explanations." Blackwood studied her face, carefully weighing his response. Then, with a decisive nod, he poured 2 glasses of whiskey and began to speak. He told her about his family's empire, built over generations, a mix of legitimate businesses interwoven with much darker enterprises. He spoke of the power struggle with the Petrov organization, of betrayals and alliances that shifted like sand in the wind. And then he told her about his wife, Anna, who had loved him despite knowing exactly who he was. She had given him Leo and dreamed of a different future for their son. She had been killed not by enemies, but by a drunk driver on a rainy night, a random tragedy that all his power and connections couldn't prevent or avenge. Outside, a security patrol passed by the window, their shadows stretching across the manicured lawn. Amber watched their methodical movements, struck by how quickly she had adapted to this almost militarized existence. Just weeks ago, such intense protection would have terrified her. Now it represented safety in a world where danger lurked behind every misplaced trust. "Your enemies know I'm here now," she stated, not as a question, but as an acknowledgement of an uncomfortable truth. "They'll assume I'm important to you, which makes me both a liability and potential leverage." The words hung in the air, unvarnished and stark in their implication. By staying, she wasn't just accepting his protection, but potentially becoming another vulnerability in his carefully fortified life. "I want something different for Leo," he admitted, his voice rough with an emotion he rarely displayed. "I've been trying to legitimize the business, to move away from the old ways. That's why the Petrovs are making their move now. They see it as weakness." Amber sat in silence, absorbing everything. The man before her was both more and less than she had imagined, capable of violence and deception, yet also driven by love for his son and a desire for redemption that he scarcely acknowledged, even to himself. "I can't offer you a normal life," Blackwood said finally, "but I can promise you'll be safe, that Leo will have someone who cares for him, and that you'll never want for anything material again." He paused, his eyes meeting hers. "The choice is yours, Amber. You can leave. I'll set you up somewhere new with a fresh start. Or you can stay with all the complications that entails." In that moment, Amber Hayes thought of her old life, the endless shifts, the constant struggle to make rent, the loneliness of her empty apartment. Then she thought of Leo's smile, of the sense of purpose she'd found here, and of the man watching her now with such rare vulnerability in his eyes. "I'll stay," she said simply, "not for the security or the comfort, but because, for the first time, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." As dawn broke over the Blackwood estate, illuminating the garden where a young boy would soon be playing, Amber made her choice, stepping willingly into a dangerous world that, against all odds, had begun to feel like home. Thank you all for following this story. If you enjoyed it, please write in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the video. Your support means everything and helps me continue creating these stories for